Brookie's on a budget. As the ice disappears from our lakes and streams, the ice fishing tackle gets put away and the softwater gear comes out.
So today, going out to Small Creek here in Marquette County, a lot of small brookies in there, but I'll be using small ice fishing tackle, so that way I don't have to stop at the store, get worms, stuff like that. Using tungsten jigs and also just the small ice fishing plastics that are usually on clearance this time of year.
And we'll take a look at Tenkara fishing, a unique way to put a fly in the water in a small stream.
So what Tenkara fishing is just the rod, you got line, and then your leader or tippet material, then a fly. That's it. There's no reel, there's no casting your line.
And we'll take a look at pickling fish. 9 million acres of forest, 1,700 miles of continuous shoreline, 4,300 lakes, 12,000 miles of streams, more than 300 waterfalls, 15 counties, 2 time zones, and 1 area code. Welcome to the Upper Peninsula. Welcome to 906 Outdoors.
That's all it is, just a small tungsten head, just all for ice fishing. And then a small, that's a power bait wishbone, I think it is. I got a bunch of them on clearance. When stuff goes like 80% off, I just stock up on it. They're good for bluegill also, trout. They work year round. Just because it says ice on it doesn't mean it's only for hard water. It's as simple as casting it out there. When you got a little bit faster currents, the tungsten actually keeps it lower too, so it doesn't get drifting as much. If you do want to drift, you just use a little bit bigger piece of plastic on there, or you just use a lead head, and it doesn't sink as much, so it'll float down if that's what you want to do. 2 different schools of thoughts on rods for these small streams I'm fishing here. Short rods, they're nice for walking through the woods. Also be able to get those little tiny casts. The kind of downfall is if you're trying to drift worms and stuff like that, your rod's not really long enough to reach out and hit those drifts. So there's always pros and cons to a lot of different things. I like to use these high-vis colors first, like reds, pinks, and stuff like that. Just so I can see the lure when I'm in these pools to see if they pick it up, because sometimes your line's slack with the current. I'll stick with that. I'm not really getting bites. Then I'll switch to more natural colors like browns and greens and stuff like that. Seeing that tungsten helps it stay on the bottom. I can see that the lure is just staying right there on the bottom. There's a little pool down there. Versus if you're using lead and worms, you'd be drifting right through there, unless you're using a lot of lead weight. So when you got these rip currents like this, you can actually watch your line and the lure, and you can kind of hop right underneath it. That's why I like to use the thinnest line I can get away with. This is 4-pound mono for my leader. Usually I use thinner, but there's a lot of rocks and brush like that, so I need the abrasion resistance of a bigger line. But the smaller your line is, the less it's going to be carried under these currents. And I always wet my hand before grabbing them. It's a lot better for the fish because they have that protective slime that it's like their immune system pretty much.
.906 Outdoors is brought to you by Race Driven, your source for premier power sports products.
Well, that's a bigger one. See, I pinch the barb down on these ice jigs too, and it makes it unhooking so much easier. There's a small creek, Brookie. Nobody really fishes these tiny little creeks. They're going to the big rivers to try to catch running steelhead. But these are all over the place, these small brookies. Oh, let's go. See, I'm not re-rigging anything. My bait still looks good. Like right here, same hole, caught 2 fish out of. I don't have to worry about rigging up worms or anything like that. I just pitch it out there and go. What I'm gonna be doing here is, you can actually swim right in front of that little buildup right here. So you can watch your lure and just swim right there, see if there's any takers underneath there. Kind of how you do that, you just control your slack and your rod tip, kind of dance right in front of it. With the jig, you get hung up less than if you're like worm fishing or using spinners, but you're still gonna get hung up because there's an exposed hook there. Just make a couple passes doing that. And if you got a really good looking spot, you just drop your lure down. Watch the slack in your line because the current will take your line downstream and get you tangled up real quick if you're not watching it. So see how the tungsten's more dense than lead, it sinks faster. So what I do in these ripply situations like this is you just control the depth with your rod tip. You get your lure out there and you can actually swim it. It takes feel and a little bit of experience just to know kind of how much you need to raise your rod tip up. That would be a pro of having a longer rod than I'm using here. This one's only 4'7", but if you're fishing a wider area and you got a little bit faster current, it'd be easier with the longer rod to control your depth. So you got current coming through and making a little pool right here. And you can do the same thing like you would with worm, just letting it ride the current. And like I said before, you just use your rod tip and watch your line too. Another thing that's good about having a leader, so I can see my line, it's white, it's really thin white braided line. It's actually ice fishing line too, which they market as repelling ice and all that stuff, but it goes on clearance in the springtime, so its fish is just the same as a normal line. So I can see my knot there, and then I have about a 3-foot leader on here, so I know when I see my knot, my lure is about 3 feet in the water. It's a good way to measure depth and also to see just how far your lure is in the water. It is nice, like when I started using the ice fishing jigs, it was mainly for me being cheap, but you can stay on the bottom in these pools so much better. If you're new to using braided line, you're gonna feel all the little vibrations from hitting the bottom and stuff like that a lot more. So you're gonna think that there's a lot more bites than you're actually getting. I can feel if I'm bouncing down rocks. You can actually feel if it's like gravel bottom or silty bottom just from dragging your jig. And if you wanna go down current, you can hop your line up in the current and your line will actually take your lure down. So every time you hop up your lure, your lure hop down current just a little bit, but you gotta also watch out for your line not to get tangled up on sticks and stuff downstream. This log that's up here, you see a log here, there's a log right here. It moves the current quite a bit. So there's a lot of good ambush points for this trout, and also the current's digging underneath them logs. So your traditional, split shot with your worm, that's gonna get hung up almost 100% right here. The ice jig, how it is, how I've been fishing it, it's a lot better chance of not getting hung up. But something I do, if I know I'm gonna be fishing a lot of brushy stuff like this, is actually just like you would for bass fishing. It's called Texas rigging, which it is useful in trout fishing too. Same thing with bluegill. I do it with bluegill when I'm fishing in lily pads. You just barely hook the bait through a little bit, just like that. And then you turn it, put it up your hook. It looks kind of awkward because it's such a short shanked hook, but it still catches fish and you get hung up a little bit less. Because when you come through, now you don't have that exposed hook point, but when a fish grabs it, you can still set the hook and the plastic will poke through the hook and fish on. So this is the Tenkara setup. It's a small collapsible rod. It's a really thin tip, as you can see. You have this little cloth piece. This is kind of weird. It's called a Lillian. So you want to keep that inside the rod and put your finger on it so you know you're not going to snap that tip off. This pink line here, this is like your main line. It's called level line. You can really use any sort of type of fluorocarbon, or you can use mono as well. Fluorocarbon is a little bit heavier, so it's easier to cast. On that, I have the tippet tied on, then with a fly. I just have a little indicator on there, that little pink indicator on there. It's fun to see the visual part of it. I'm not out here tournament fishing, so I'm just trying to get most enjoyment out of it as I can. And then on the other end of the line, I have just a slip knot on there. So what that's going to do is just cinch down onto that, on the Lillian. That's this right here. It has that little knot on there. So there's a couple different schools. You can wrap the Lillian around the loop twice and pull it out, but you could just pinch it right down by that knot on the Lillian, pull your main line, and it stays right on that knot, which is very surprising. I was kind of skeptical of it at first. Just pull it kind of tight. You pull the rod out one section at a time, and that's it. Now I'm ready to fly fish that quick. So you have to stay really low because you don't have much line out there. And these skinny little creeks like this too, you got to make sure that the fish aren't going to see you. Doing the Tenkara stuff like this, I'm very new. I just started it like a couple weeks ago, but it's really fun, and it's probably a way that it's going to get me into more traditional fly fishing versus getting the fly set up right away with the rod, the line, the reel, all that stuff. It's a path I really didn't want to go down, so that's why I discovered the Tenkara path first. And I'm hoping I don't have to go through and spend a bunch of money getting hooked on fly gear, but it's probably going to happen. So I pitched the barb down on my flies too. It makes it a lot easier to unhook. You just grab them, unhook it, it's good to go. you're gonna lose a couple fish, but I'd rather lose a couple fish on my line than to lose them just dying in the river or wherever. It's as simple as that is fly fishing versus having to mess with your line down by your feet and stuff like that. Like I said, I've only been doing this for, I don't know, a couple weeks or so, and it's definitely got me hooked into fly fishing. It's also just a different technique, so I can use a little bit heavier stuff like those jigs. And if I'm not really catching much or I just want to switch it up, I just use a small little Tenkara rod and I'm good to go.
Today's show is brought to you in part by Rapid River Knife Works, home of Michigan's largest custom knife factory showroom.
A downside of doing this type of fishing, especially with a really short rod, is you gotta get kind of close to the fish, so you gotta kind of creep in there and kneel down, stuff like that. Most of the parts of this little rod is good, especially for the small fish, but a lot of times you get into situations where you want a longer rod, and that's where most of them are longer, about 11 feet. They even go up to like 20 feet for like bigger waters, but right here for these little streams, this is just over 6 foot. I'm still a little bit on the small side. I'm still trying to weigh my options on how long of a rod to get for a second one. If you're in little creeks like this, probably like 8 feet, maybe even 11 feet. The problem is walking through all this stuff. The tips are pretty fragile and the rods are long and you have your line is out like this. So walking through the woods can kind of be difficult with it fully extended. But if you got wide open, a little bit more open areas, well, you can definitely get away with a longer rod. So with your main line, you want to use a high visibility line. I chose pink because using something like the high vis orange, like a hunter's orange, it's a little bit tougher to see in the fall time, I'd imagine, with all the leaves changing and stuff like that. So I chose pink because it's definitely the least natural. And a lot of times you're gonna see the strike with your line before you even feel it, especially if you're nymphing or using anything that's subsurface. And the real fun about this is you're looking at areas that are just completely different than you normally look for brook trout. So normally you're looking for bigger boulders, bigger logs that are making little current and stuff like holes. Everything's downsized when you're fishing like this. So like this small rock here, you might pass that up if you're fishing for like, I guess, dinner-sized brook trout. So it does make it a little bit more challenging, but also you're gonna catch a lot more fish because you're gonna catch a lot of those little 4-inch brookies that you might try to pass over with the normal rod. We got a small little Tenkara rod like this, they're loads of fun.
Now, a look at a little bit different type of fishing.
Nice. Left, 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 left. I'm lifted. Oh my gosh, where are you? I got one. What the hell?
No waders.
See you later.
Oh, there's fish there.
Suckers are among the first fish to attract attention in the spring as they begin their run to spawn over gravel river bottoms. The spawn lasts about a week. Suckers are fair game all year with no limits.
Usually about 2 weeks after the ice off, the lake will get it. I'm not sure what the water temperature is, but usually the walleye spawn and then the suckers are up the river very shortly after.
Suckers can be found in virtually all the state's rivers, including most trout streams. And in some places, they can be harvested with dip nets.
That's how we kind of start out with, setting up nets and then driving the suckers to the nets. It's just, we've always done that forever. Works really good. So they say some people spear them. That's legal. below the highway bridge on the south side. Same with the netting also, you can't go north of the highway bridge. Because above the highway bridge it's considered a trout stream.
In the river with Glenn are his kids Glenn Jr. and Marcella, and Glenn's sister Amy. On shore is his wife Rosemary, their youngest son Finley, and Amy's husband Tom. Glenn has been doing this for 34 years, and his kids have been for as long as they can remember.
Yeah, once you start taking Marcella and Glenn Jr. down there, and I kind of got demoted off the nets and got to driving them. A lot more fun handling the net.
Suckers are ugly fish. They get their name from their fleshy-lipped mouths located on the underside of their heads. They have a long cylindrical body and a single soft-rayed dorsal fin.
Yep, bumps are males. The smooth ones are females.
Oh, really?
Female.
Yep.
Female. We're down a net.
Well, I can use that net. It'll hold one fish.
Just reverse it.
Just reverse it.
Okay, she'll be good for one. In order to catch the fish, you gotta be like the fish.
906 Outdoors is brought to you by Cooking Wild Seasonings. Make it fresh, make it yours.
Now, anglers are firmly divided on suckers as table fare. Suckers have a bad rap as trash fish because of being bottom feeders. Some people swear by them though, especially in spring when their meat is firm. They are typically pickled, smoked, or deep fried. Tonight, we're pickling them.
3 cuts for smoking. Cut that off and I'll cut that up for pickling. You see up in here is just like regular wide bones, like a northern, but from here back is really full of bones. And here I have 2 quarts of water and 2 cups of salt, which is enough to float an egg, which is kind of standard for any pickled fish recipe. Cut them down the center. Just make bite-sized pieces. So it sits in there for 2 days and then goes in vinegar solution for 2 more days. We started this batch 4 days ago. Now this batch is about 6 pounds of fish, so I did 3 quarts of water and 3 cups of salt. Today is make the brine that will make the pickled fish its finished product. And for that, we will need 3 cups of sugar, but we're gonna use maple sugar that my wife had made. So we need 3 cups of this. Oh, we'll get it close anyways. 6 cups of vinegar. 6. Next we need 1.5 cups of red wine. It says dry port wine. I use any red wine. Next we need 4 sections of lemon squeezed. Put the lemon in there for the boiling process. And then 3 tablespoons of pickling spice. Mix this up and we'll put it on the stove. And then once it starts to boil, we boil it for 5 minutes. And now after 2 days in the salt brine, took the fish out, rinsed it, put it back in the jug, and then covered it with just straight vinegar. And then it sits 2 days. What that'll do is that'll dissolve any of the bones that are in the fish. So drain off the vinegar. Now we'll pack the jars with some fish. And some onions. Never too many onions in pickled fish. And for each quart jar, we'll put in 2 slices of lemon. And just repeat until all our fish are gone. You're supposed to wait 2 weeks. That's a tough battle there. Usually about a week in I start, if I can wait that long. But yeah, they say 2 weeks before they're fully ready. Oh, that's starting to boil. A few more minutes, we'll let that cool off. I'm just gonna set this in some ice water. Get that cooled back down so we don't cook the fish. May produce an undesirable texture. This can also be prepared, a couple hours or so before the packing process, and it should be cooled down enough to pour onto the fish then. We're down to 70 degrees, that'll be cool enough. Just take each jar and fill it up with the brine. And then the longer this sits, the brine will turn more clear and the wine will actually get absorbed into the fish and turn the fish red. If it lasts that long. And that is pickled sucker.
Feel free to join us on Facebook or visit us at 906outdoors.com for a look at all of our shows, as well as the 906 Outdoors Fishing Report, shopping, and more. Thanks for watching, and we invite you to join us next week for another adventure right here on 906 Outdoors.